Hello and welcome to our next Access 21 session, How Reality-Based Leaders Make Decisions with Data. Before we begin, we have a few technical reminders to share. If you're having technical difficulties, please use the Need Help tab on the platform. All attendees' microphones will be muted during the presentation. Please use the chat function on your menu to ask any questions and connect with your fellow attendees. This session is being recorded. You will be able to access the recording within the platform afterwards. Please provide your feedback and complete the survey after the session. Lastly, use hashtag Access21 to share your conference experience. We would like to thank Delcor for sponsoring this session. We appreciate your support on this important and timely topic. I would now like to introduce our speakers for today's session. Our first speaker is Thomas Lyons, Chief Information Officer at the American Society for Microbiology. And our second speaker for today is Julie Sculio, CEO of Associations Analytics. After the presentation, please join us for a live Q&A session with our speakers. I would now like to invite Thomas and Julie to the virtual stage. Thank you both for leading our group in this discussion.
Thank you, and thank you for having us. So we're going to dive right in. First, I want to welcome everybody. I'm sure you were attending sessions previous to this. Hopefully we will have an action-packed hour. And of course, thanks Tom for joining us to share your experiences. The format for today, just so you guys know, we always want it to be collaborative. Please join us in conversation in the chat. I think you can learn just as much from each other as you can from us, certainly. And we want to share those experiences. So today we're going to be talking a lot about data. I consider myself a data expert, been doing this for a really long time. And so I'm going to share hopefully some content and takeaways that you can take back and actionable items that you can hopefully implement right away. And Tom's going to be sharing his experiences, some tips and tricks from the CIO seat that he's been able to accomplish in his data journey. So with that, I'm going to pose a question to you guys and really think about this. How are you making decisions today? Are you making it by instinct, politics, tradition? That's a lot of the ways associations make decisions. And has that changed throughout the pandemic? Are you now having to scrutinize business decisions even more? The other question would be, is your data spread throughout? So 85% of organizations struggle because their data is captured and stored in disparate systems. And this is common. And we'll show you a little bit more of what that could look like. And usually people are shooting to get to a place, if you kind of take that mentality with begin with the end in mind, they're looking for an optimized for analysis. So your data being all in one place, really looking to get the 360 view of members, really drive member engagement. And then once you get to that point, you might be able to layer on some predictive analytics and maybe even a recommendation engine. So with that, I'm going to pose the question to Tom. At ASM, how are you guys making decisions, and what would be the ideal state of making decisions for you guys? And a little bit about your org, if that's helpful. I know that's usually helpful context for people in the audience.
Yeah, so, scientific society, a membership professional society. We are global in nature, a little under 200 employees, and our membership is around 30,000. We publish over a dozen different journals. We have big and small meetings. So we might be a little bigger than a small association, but we're not outsized, I don't think. Yeah, I mean, I think ASM, we've been maturing, I think, in the way we use data in our decision making to help, inform the organization, help the business units inform their decision making and shape conversations. And that's taken time to do that. And I don't think we're close to done. And there's probably some units that are applying data in more ways than others. And I think, from a future state standpoint, we'd like to build an environment where that data is democratized, where it's widely available, where it's transparent, and where it's valuable to all of our staff in shaping our business and driving our mission forward. It ranges from the simple things of everybody knows how many members we have, everybody knows how many people are registered for the meeting, and we're all speaking sort of from that one truth without having to know the person who has it on their desktop, right? I mean, I think that's pretty important, but also more complex. And how do we put data together to gain insights about what's valuable to our members, what's valuable to the industry? How do we gain insights about what draws people into our mission and into our organization?
And one follow-up question. So what do you think took you kind of from 0 to 1? Because I feel like that's a very hard point for people to get to, or maybe it's just not recognized as going from 0 to 1. What do you think did it for you guys that maybe could help somebody in the audience today?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I sort of two things come to mind. Number one, I think there's good people in our organization who started looking, at least within their line of businesses, of how they can use data. So I think that the people element is important, right? Like we want to start to show people there is data there for them to use in their business and in their activities. But I also think the other element is to start having conversations across business units. It was really important to us to start shaping the information, for instance, that we were collecting about customers to ensure it was consistent from one activity to the other and not changing, right? That's a simple foundation. It's really hard to compare what somebody said at a meeting to what somebody said when they're an author if you're not asking the same questions, or to see if that person is evolving in what they're providing to you. So I think that was a really helpful start for us, and it introduced the concept of data governance to people without maybe introducing something they think is hard and heavy and laborious and boring.
Yeah, exactly. Whenever you can kind of bring it to life. So that's a great takeaway right there, and something that I've seen work really well when you're first taking off in your data and analytics journey is a cross-functional team. And you don't have to worry too much about what that team looks like. You just need to pull the people out of departments that are curious about data, that are using data, and sit together in a room and start to talk about what that looks like for your organization, maybe get some executive support. And that could be a great takeoff if anybody is at the launching point. So one great takeaway there. So now we have a question, we have a poll question here. What is your biggest barrier to making data guided decisions? Now that you have a little bit of context, we got to hear where Tom's at. We're going to go ahead and put the poll out there to see how you and the audience feel about your biggest barrier. So there we go. It's launched. We'll keep this up for a minute. And Tom, do you want to share what ASM's biggest barrier is currently? I mean, I feel like these could probably change as well, but currently, what do you think it is?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. This is a tough one, and maybe we're seeing it reflected in the polling in real time, right? There's everybody's picking lots of different answers, and I think, for all of us in the association space, we probably have a little bit of a lot of these answers. Certainly at ASM, we haven't fixed all of our foundational issues yet, and we're still aiming to leverage more of our data in meaningful ways. I think we always need to reflect on whether or not we're using available data sources to inform our decisions, whether we gather enough information, and whether we've really only just begun, when you think about tools to launch all the visuals in a dynamic environment that are meaningful and help people consume. And we're trying to advance our own people, right? We're trying to advance the tools that we use, the skill sets that we have, the knowledge that we have. So, we might be in all of the above, but I think a lot of associations are all of the above. I think a lot of organizations are all of the above. You don't have to push over one domino at a time, right? And you want to advance where you can.
Yeah. And so I've shared the results here. All the above was the most common answer. We actually didn't have anybody in at the last minute had don't value data decision making, because usually that's where you see the gap. We even did a large survey at ASA annual years ago, and it fell. I think it was 75% of folks really valued, 75, 76 valued data decision making, but only less than 18%, I believe is what it was, had the proper tools and training. And so this is still reflective of that gap. And hopefully we can continue to close that. Even today, we're going to be sharing some knowledge and hopefully give you some power to go back to your associations and be able to leverage some data in a meaningful way for your association. And you could be that person who drives that. All right, so let's talk about who is a reality-based leader and what does that really mean, right? Because we hear the term, it could be interpreted in many different ways. But these are the three things that really stuck out that we're going to be talking about today. And you can answer these to yourself. You can answer these as an individual, as an organization. Can you quickly see the reality of a situation to really break through and see what's really happening in a situation? Do you thoughtfully use your team's energy to impact reality rather than their energy to maybe just run that report that they've always run or do something because you did it last year? Really start to get in the mindset, if you want to be a reality-based leader, to using your team's energy to always impact that reality that you're in currently. And then do you anticipate upcoming changes? And you can use data to support all of these. But it's not only data. This is a conversation Tom and I've had frequently. You want to make sure that you're taking into account the context of the situation, the personalities, the people, as well as your own experiences or your team's experiences, and balancing all of that to get to a proper decision. And wouldn't it be nice if we all had a crystal ball? I don't know if anybody out there does. I don't yet, maybe one day in the future. I did have that game Ask Xandar when I was younger, but it didn't quite tell me the future of the company and the world. But one thing that we do have, and that's why we're all here today, of course, is data. And we can leverage that data to give us some insight. And while it won't be the crystal ball effect, it will give us an indication. Will give us an indication that we can pull an insight out and act on. And that's really what you want to do when you're thinking about how and why you want to leverage data. So now let's dive into this thought process a little bit more. And this was actually from a Forbes article, Actionable Insights. It's the missing link between data and business value. Because I would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, anybody on the chat, everybody here has data. Associations have been around for a really long time, and that's one thing that we have. And it is absolutely an asset, but it is only an asset if we can turn that into information and we can turn that into valuable insights that are going to make a difference and move the needle at our association. So to put this into everyday terms, an Apple Watch, right? A lot of us may have one, or a Fitbit or something like that. It gives us lots of data, right? It might tell me how many steps I took. Okay, what does that really mean? That's just a piece of data. It has no context. It's not information. It's not insightful. So then you take that one step further. And some information might be how I did compared to last week, how I did overall for the week. So now I'm getting a little bit more information. Now here's where the insight comes into play. So now I know today I walked 7,442 steps, and I want to get to 10,000. Now I have an exact number that I want to achieve. I know exactly how to do that. That's by taking those steps. And I know how much time I have. I have until midnight. So then I can choose based off of that insight in action, which is to take those steps. And so that same thought process could be applied to data in reality-based leadership. And so let's take a look at what that might look like. So how can I use data to be a reality-based leader? So we all have questions, right? And this is usually what we're trying to answer with data. So which of my members are more likely to renew? Which of my members are less likely to renew? Maybe who are my highly engaged non-members? Who are the community influencers for our trending topics that we might want to get to speak at our next conference? One that came up a lot at the beginning of the pandemic was, which products should we sunset? What should we get rid of because we have less resources and we need to make sure we're pointing those in the right direction. And so these are some common questions that we hear from associations. Tom, what are some of your questions at ASM currently?
Yeah, I mean, I think like many organizations, probably a bunch of those questions resonate with everybody, right? And we're looking for the same sorts of questions, right? What are the services? What are the products? What are the activities that engage our members and engage people in our field? How can we help our members and how can we help the field advance? And probably at the core of that is, what is valuable to the people in our field? If we're here to serve the field, what's valuable to those people who are engaged in the work every day? And how can we help advance the people engaged in microbiology? How can we help advance the field of microbiology to be meaningful?
So anybody else have any burning questions right now, please put it in the chat. If you're trying to answer something at your association or you feel like the same question always comes up and you never get that answer, I'd love to hear what it is. Maybe we can even help you crack that nut at some point. So throw it in the chat if you have one of those burning questions. So now let's look at where your data lives within your ecosystem, right? So we don't always think about this. We go about our day-to-day operational activities and don't necessarily think about all of the data we use in our jobs and where it might live. So this might be how your stack looks. You might have a few more, a few less, but typically you have an AMS or CRM that you have a lot of transactional data stored in. You also, probably more now than ever, have a lot of data stored in your webinar platforms, your virtual event platforms, your registration platforms, learning and certification, certainly a really big one. Abstracts, Tom had mentioned, huge in the medical fields, marketing automation, Google Analytics website, and social media. So you have a lot of data in a lot of different places. And if I were to ask, what percent of that data do you think you're really leveraging? My guess would be less than 10%. Actually, throw that in the chat. I don't know why I can't see the chat, but I would love to hear how much of that data, now that you kind of wrapped your head around your ecosystem, how much of that data do you actually think you're leveraging? And Tom, what do you think it is for ASM, and how do you plan to grow that percentage to leverage more data?
I think we've made a small bit of progress in that area, and that we're probably pretty good at looking at a lot of our data in the silos that it lives in. But now what we're trying to do is leverage that data further and pull that data together, particularly that customer view, and trying to understand and see more about our customers and relate those activities together, right? So we might have we know you went to a meeting, we know you published it with us, we know you submitted an abstract, and we might know a little bit more about you in terms of your field and your interests and your education, but how can we maximize leveraging that by bringing it all together is really sort of our next challenge, I think.
Exactly. So I'm going to throw that out. This is just a poll question for the chat. So do you have data in disparate, disconnected systems? Kind of what Tom's talking about is you might have departments or certain systems that are producing a lot of data that you're taking a look at, but it's really a challenge when it comes down to breaking those silos. So just throw a yes or no so we can kind of get a feel for where people are and if this is still a challenge for you. I think we're probably getting a lot of yeses. Can you see the chat?
Absolutely getting a lot of yeses.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, at this point.
Okay, so I think everybody can agree with this mentality, and I'm going to talk a little bit about structured and unstructured data. If you want to get, dangerous at your next dinner talk about data, you can throw out these terms. And so structured data is things that can be put pretty nicely into rows and columns. So that would be the red part here. So that would be your demographics, your transactions, and this is typically what we think about when we're thinking about data and how to leverage data. And on the left-hand side is behavioral data. So this might be a little less used when we think about data and analytics. One good use case of this is community data. And I think we touch on that. And social, so social media. So things that more people talking, and right, isn't that what we always wanted to know? What are our members talking about? What do they care about? And now we actually have these platforms that are producing that data. So how do we go ahead and take advantage of that? All right, so we're trying to move to a state like this. This is typically where a lot of people are, and they're trying to make decisions as a reality-based leader, but don't always have exactly what they need to do that. Like if I were to look at this and say, hey, is membership trending up or down over the past quarter? I don't know. And is it because of a certain geography? Is it because of a certain member type that's dropping off? Is it because we have a retention problem or a recruitment problem? You're just like looking at this report and you're like, I don't know, Julie, I couldn't tell you. I could tell you how many members we have, which that's great information. And that's operational reporting. You'll absolutely always need that. You could pull that probably directly out of your AMS or CRM or events registration systems. But what we're talking about is taking it one step further to data and analytics, where you're looking at trends over time, right? You want things that you can easily explore to get the questions that you want. More what Tom was referring to earlier, where you're democratizing data. And that definitely opens up some transparency. And so the communication around having a data and analytics program and inviting that into your day-to-day operations definitely needs to happen. It's not just this, light switch that goes off. It takes some training. It takes a lot of communication. It takes people changing, maybe the ways that they've always done things to an easier way to make decisions. And so when people say, I want to get to a place where I have dashboards that tell us what's going on, there's definitely some other steps that take place, before and certainly after. It kind of never stops. And that's what this is showing here. So this is the evolution of BI. So when you think about, years and years ago, and maybe some people are still at this state, and you know what, you probably are, and that's okay, where you have IT producing reports to end users. A lot gets lost in translation. Usually when I get a report pulled from somebody, in IT, I have about 7 more questions because of what I'm seeing on the piece of paper. And then by the time I put in those 7 requests, IT is sick of me and everybody else. And I'm like, okay, sorry, but I'm really trying to get these answers so I can do my job, right? And so then we kind of evolved and moved to this like analyst to end user. And so you might have somebody in membership, you might have a dedicated analyst, or a lot of times what I see is just somebody who takes on that role. Because depending on your size, Tom, you guys are, maybe a little bit bigger than some people on here. Maybe some people are larger and might have a couple of analysts. It doesn't really matter. A lot of times somebody takes on that role and becomes the analyst within a certain department or for the organization. It's actually a great career path I've seen, is somebody takes it on in, let's just say registrations, and then they continue to grow and people want more and more of that. And then they go into like a central analyst role. I've actually seen it even grow into a managing director of strategy, which was a really cool kind of path and trajectory. And typically what people are shooting for at the end of this is the end user BI, where everybody can go in and kind of get the access to the information that they want and need. And if you want to be a reality-based leader, that doesn't mean you have to be the executive director, the CEO. You can be a reality-based leader no matter where you sit in the organization. And what makes that easier is whenever you're able to leverage data and pull insights to make the decisions that you need to make within your job.
I think the other reality of this, Julia, and you and I have talked about this, is is that it's quite possible for organizations to live in sort of all three of these categories. And sometimes the reality is there's technical expertise required to pull data, put it together, serve it up in a way that's consumable, whether it's for a tool or for an analyst to consume, right? And so that IT expertise, that technical expertise, still might be continuing to deliver something in this, right? And there's also the reality all the way at the other end of the wave is that not everybody, wants to spend all day pulling data apart and trying to figure out, right? It goes back to what we talked about earlier. There's subject matter expertise in the building usually, right? There's somebody who knows how to read, quote unquote, that portfolio. Are we getting as many meeting registrations as we should, or are we not? They know whether that should be red or green. And other folks have to sort of trust that person saying we're either on budget or we're not on budget, right? Or we've hit the numbers or we haven't hit the numbers. So I think, a lot of organizations tend to live across these waves, but with the goal of being able to serve up that truth to everyone, right? Because if everyone's pulling the data apart and twisting it back together, you may not have consistency that you need, right? And you may have very different numbers in the end of it. So I think that's part of the goal too.
Yeah, absolutely. Another takeaway is definitely the IT, business user partnership. And so a lot of times that conversation happens whenever we're talking about who owns the data. And it's like, oh, IT owns the data. Oh, membership owns the data. The reality is, or should be, the organization owns the data. And everybody should be partnering to leverage that data to move the organization forward, to support the mission of the organization. And so if people can change their mindset a little bit around that, where it's not about ownership of the data, the organization owns that, and we're partnering together to get the best information we can out of that, to get that one insight we need to move us to that next level. And so I hope everybody can take that back to their organizations and start to put that into play. And that comes down to exactly what Tom's talking about. When you walk into a meeting, it shouldn't be about using data for the defense. It should be about using data for the offense. It doesn't matter why something happened necessarily, like the who behind it. What matters is how do we get together and move the ball down the field, right? The offense side. And I think too often I've seen data being used on the defense and then nothing gets resolved. Like you don't get to that insight, to that action to move the organization forward. Okay, and these are ways, so if you want to be a reality-based leader, you want to leverage some data, I'm going to show you 4 ways, I'm going to share with you 4 ways that you can do that. Okay, so you can start with a question and look for an answer. So all of those questions we had earlier, maybe some of you threw one into the chat that's been a burning question for you. Maybe it's something more simple that you want to start with. Wherever you want to start, just start with a question that either you or your organization have, and then look for the answer within the data. And that's a great way to start to exercise that kind of analytical, reality-based leadership style. Second would be start with an assumption. I feel like a lot of associations have these, a lot of companies have them. I would just say a lot of organizations have assumptions they make, right? And they could be big assumptions that you make year after year. It's almost like this story that gets told throughout the organization and you all just believe it, right? Or it could be small ones that you make on the fly in a meeting at a director's meeting. Any of those. Pick one of those assumptions, back it up with data or not, or bust it. And then, it usually leads to that next better quality question that's going to continue to allow you to know your members and non-members even better and engage with them in different ways. The third one is start with data. This one's a little harder, I think, partially because of what you were just talking about, Tom. Not everybody wants to just dive into data and they don't know what data to start with. We are going to give you a couple of places you can start if you would like to. But if you are a data person and you kind of want to dive into the data and just pick something, pick your membership data in a certain member type and look at that. Was there a drop off somewhere that you don't really have any context? You don't understand why that is. And that's going to lead you to the next question that you should be asking. And so that's called just uncovering the insights. And then the last one is start with the past and find clues. So kind of looking back and find clues. This one I feel like is even a little less relevant now because a lot of things changed over the past year. So if I were to make a recommendation, I would do one of the first three, although I'm sure there are cases for the last one. And so Tom, do you guys have a particular one, or you personally, that you typically lean towards when you're going to uncover some data insights?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of these can be great prompts, right, to start drilling into things. I probably lean towards start with the data, and interestingly, you identify that can be tough, but I also think sometimes it can be easy, right? In that, by starting with the data, you have a good place to jump off. You can take existing reports, validate them with the business units, say, is this valuable? Is this not valuable? How do you want to look at it? And move really quickly from there, because if you're already producing some level of reporting, you have data already, right? And you can advance them into visual tools like the graphs that we're seeing on the slide, right? And maybe even interactive tools. Now all of a sudden you have user involvement, and you can iterate from that really quickly, and you get immediate reaction and feedback. And often it helps people sort of get excited and help you shape maybe those insights to be more valuable. While I think starting with a question can be a strong place to be, but it's also, I'd add this caveat. A lot of organizations then get stuck for a long time on the question and where to get the data and how do we get the data, and we don't have that, and we'll never get that answer, right? And now you get hung up and you never get to that actual step. And I think be cautious of getting bogged down in that discovery and that discussion and that debate about what the answer should be, versus grab some things that you want to know, or you might even already know, but how can you share that more widely and then get other people excited? And that might lead you down the path to validating some of the assumptions you've always made, or people prompting you with questions to help dive into that data.
So that's a great takeaway, is start with the data you have. And the other kind of misconception that I often hear is my data is too dirty to do anything with. It's not too dirty to do anything with. There will be some valuable insights that you can certainly pull out of there, and your data will never be, certainly 100% clean. So at what threshold, right? And so just starting with the data, I love that. And it reminds me of whenever we used to go into assignments and ask associations, well, what do you want to measure? And they're like, I don't know. Why don't you tell me what we should be measuring? And it was like, okay, well, let's see what data you have, and then we can tell you, align that with your strategic goals, and we can kind of fill that gap. And so that's absolutely right. And so no matter where you are in the organization, even if you're trying to take something to management or to the executive team, starting with the data that you have and putting that in some sort of visualization will allow whoever the audience is to have a reaction to it. And it gives you a starting point, which is a really great point, Tom. And so that way you can get to the next best version for your organization. So I said 1 through 3 would be my recommendation. I'm going to take it back and I'm going to say start with the data, because you have it. So it's not going to be a barrier to starting. So if you want to know the top 3 areas you can analyze right now to enhance your member experience, we're going to give you those really quickly. So the first one is analyzing overall sales. And like I said, at the beginning of the pandemic, we saw a lot of people throughout all of the industries go ahead and do this because they really needed to point their resources at the right places. So these are just some examples to get your brain flowing a little bit, and hopefully maybe you'll jot a couple of things down that might resonate with you or your organization that you can go back and implement. So top products by sales. And a lot of this is just about asking the next question. So I look at that and I say, well, I know I sit on marketing and I've been really promoting something that's not even on here. right? And so then I might dive in further and say, where is it on the list? Oh my goodness, it's number 172. That's a problem, right? Either the messaging is not resonating, we need to try something new, the product isn't a product market fit for my industry, whatever it may be. And so you always want to be asking that next better quality question. The same thing with the top products by quantity, and then sales overall for the year. You always want to have some sort of goal associated. So that's like the green line, however you would want to visualize that. And you can see, okay, how are we doing? Is that, how does that stack up against next year? How does that stack up against last quarter? You know, are we trending ahead? Why? And then you always want to come out with an action, right? Like we really wanted to be ahead in abstract. So let's put together an action plan and go and conquer that. And the next time we meet as, you know, managers or directors or as that team, we're going to look at that again and see if the needle actually moved. It's really actually rewarding whenever you do that and you go back and you're like, that actually worked. You know, we're actually doing it. We're moving the needle. And you can see that in a visualization.
Julie, you know, with regards to goals too, I'd add sometimes some organizations we struggle with like, oh, what's our goal? What's our number? What's this? What's that? And I'd actually encourage people, a lot of times you can go back and just look at your budget. Your budget probably tells you how many products you're expecting to sell, right? And your budget probably tells you how many members you're expecting to have because you put a number in there. And by putting it in a budget, it's a goal. It doesn't mean that, you know, the organization failed if you miss it by 10 people, but it gives you a marker. And so that might be a way for people to source maybe a few of those benchmarks, you know, that might evolve over time or might not be easily identified. You might find it in the budget.
Yep. No, that's a great tip. And that's actually what we do in Acumen. We'll do it based off of what you were, where you were last year, and then your overall budget for the year. And that way you can see exactly that. And I would say 90% of our customers, that's what they use. So great tip, Tom. The other one, of course, is analyze event attendees. Again, you want to start to think about how you think about your members or how you think about your registrants and what you're trying to grow. So if you have a goal for this meeting that you wanted it to be, you know, mostly executives, and you're going to analyze your registrations and you're like, okay, like where did we miss? You know, and then you can dive in a little bit deeper. You know, were we marketing to the right people? Do we have the right content? You can continue to ask yourself those questions. So member segments, event attendees, doesn't matter if it's virtual or not, those things don't matter. Actually, virtually, you typically have even more data points because you know exactly how people are engaging, what they're signing into without even like the beacon technology. So it's actually an opportunity to understand our registrants more than we ever have. And then also start to understand who are the people that are always going to want to continue to attend our virtual events as opposed to our in-person events. And maybe that's not the same for every event we have. Maybe our, you know, larger annual meeting might be different than some of our smaller meetings or however you have it broken out. So I encourage you again to set up the cross-functional team, you know, because membership might be already analyzing this. Maybe events are already analyzing this, but whenever you get the cross-functional team really thinking about how you can ask different questions or ask questions in a different way or how it might be affecting somebody else, that's when you start to break down those silos, even from a data standpoint, and combine some of that. And that's when it becomes very fruitful for the organization as a whole. And then number 3, member segments, I might have given that away a few moments ago. So really looking at which members are most engaged, least engaged, and diving into what does that really mean? How do I figure out, you know, somebody that's a 99 out of 100, what are they doing with us? How can I get more people like them or more people similar to them to do the same thing with us? So again, these are just 3 ideas. We wanted to give you concrete takeaways that you can go back and dive into if you don't have a place to start. Most people have this data already. So again, start with the data you have, use one of these 3 questions and dive in and see what answers you can pull out of it, what insights you can pull out of it. All right. So now we kind of shared a lot of information, threw a lot of information at you, hopefully changed your mindset a little bit to be a reality-based leader, gave you some very concrete ways that you can leverage data, what data to leverage, how to leverage that data. And so now if you're still scratching your head, where do I start? Tom, where do you think people should start, or where did you guys start?
Yeah, I think I'll probably offer a couple things here. Number one, I think you have to look to start simple, right? Start with something easy, accessible. Hopefully you can identify a partner, a business unit who wants to work on developing something that maybe to make something more valuable than it is, or bring some value out of something. And if you can build something that appeals to a wide audience, like great questions about meeting or membership, right? Like most organizations, a lot of people in the association want to know how we're doing on membership. That gets you a wider audience to consume it. The other thing I'd say is there might be data that changes very infrequently, or things that change more frequently. More frequently and changes mean people will come back to look at the changes more frequently, right? If it's only how many people went to our meeting last month, well, that's not changing for another 12 months. And while it becomes a truth, it doesn't invite people maybe back into however you're sharing that data in an inviting way. So that can be something else to look at. Something simple, something you have, and something that has wider appeal. I'll share something with you, and you may know this organization, Julie, but a colleague of all of ours, right? They were struggling at their organization with they had meetings that were bi-coastal depending on the year, and their membership board, right, was very, very convinced that depending on the coast, that's who's going to attend. We'll get some people from Europe, and the East Coast is going to attend, or we'll be on the West Coast and we'll get the Pacific Rim and the West Coast to attend. And that goes back to the assumption challenge that you spoke about. All it took was a little bit of analysis of meeting attendance over the past few years, and all of a sudden that assumption that had been prevalent in the organization for years broke down really quickly because it wasn't true. And it was impactful for them because they all of a sudden thought about how they were marketing, what they were doing, where they were messaging the people they were trying to attract to that meeting, and it changed their actions and hopefully changed some of the trajectory of the meeting and the willingness to where they put that meeting. Really simple. I think, most of us would say that's not like some deep insight. I didn't have to go and pull 10,000 databases, but it had a real meaningful impact on what they were doing. And it was data they had right at their fingertips all along.
Yeah, I often see that assumptions, certainly busting an assumption gets a lot of attention. So that's certainly, if you can't think of what that might be, or you don't have the data to support that, I'm going to go back to the very concrete takeaway of start with the data you already have and put that into a visualization, even in Excel. If you can Google and YouTube to figure out how to do a simple visualization in there, or Microsoft Power BI. That's a great resource. A lot of us already have it at our organizations with our Microsoft package. And again, you can just Google or YouTube to learn how to do some simple things. Yes, it gets very complex, but if we're taking Tom's advice and we're starting simple and we're starting with the data we have, and we could be a little bit resourceful to learn a new trick or tip on the internet, you can put that together and bring it to somebody and show your organization the power of visualization and the power of visualizing data. So that's a great place to start. Now, some lessons learned. We always like to talk about that. So we kind of given you this, great road of success that you can take, but don't think that you're going to get there without some trial and error and maybe a couple of failures, and that's okay. So Tom, can you share with us any lessons learned throughout your journey at ASM?
Yeah, I mean, I think the try, fail, success is appropriate. Although I'd rather say try, iterate, and succeed, and then iterate again, right? So I think that's a big point there. Expect to iterate, plan it in your project. In fact, that probably tells you that what you did was valuable. And when you start introducing some of these things into an organization, my experience says that people sort of get excited and come back to you with second and third and fourth and fifth questions, right? But that's what you want. That's the goal. The other reality is, check the data again, check the data a third time, check it a fourth time. Mistakes might be made, right? And you want to make sure that what you pulled and how you filtered your data and all those kinds of things were right. And sometimes things get lost in language. So involve the consumer, involve the business unit, have them help you check your data, have them really explain when they say, oh, we want membership of this type. But somebody who's pulling the data, the type has changed 5 times in the last 10 years. Well, what type equals what type in 2018 versus 2019 versus 2021, right? So I think that involvement helps you make sure you maybe minimize those mistakes.
Yeah. And one other, I don't know if this is a lessons learned, it might be. So for people that may be a little bit further along, we've been talking about member engagement forever and engagement scoring forever within the association industry. And it might have some value to do engagement scoring in your individual systems. But if you can think about engagement scoring overall, because going back to the chart I showed you earlier, you need to make sure you're including your unstructured data as well as your structured data. So yes, the things that are coming out of your AMS are important, but over 70% of association data is actually coming from the unstructured side. So if you're not including that in understanding your members, that's a huge miss. Right? You have all of that data available to you, and you need to make sure you're leveraging that data. So that's data out of your community if you have one, that's data from your social media. I've even seen people use data from their call centers. So anywhere that you have data where you have your members and non-members telling you what they're interested in or what they like or dislike, we want to make sure we're taking that into account. And so pulling that overall engagement, and the one tip I'll give you on overall engagement, because this was a lessons learned that I've seen with a lot of organizations, use a scale of 100. It's just intuitive, it's easy, and it makes you make some hard decisions. Because yes, you're going to have to weight activities. Actually, we have a free guide. I think, Sarah, I might have shared it with you. If you can drop it into the chat for everybody. And that way, if you are at this point in your journey, you can go there to get some guidance. But that was certainly a lessons learned that I've seen where people really grapple with this for years on end. And it's really about just getting to a starting point, and that should be your focus, and not worried about did we pick the right activities? Did we weight them correctly? That'll help you at least have a framework to get off of the ground. And then I wouldn't recommend changing that more than once a year, right? Because you want to be able to have a baseline. I would probably say 2 if you can, hold some people at bay. But that's certainly a lessons learned there as well. So with that, I did not have the chat up, so I don't know if there were any questions throughout.
We do have one question in the chat, and it's
perfect.
Have you any tips as to how to begin to pull together a set of myths or assumptions so as to really probe the value of data?
Ooh, I feel like these are like generational stories that are told. If I were you, what I would do is take a look at or interview some of the other people that have been around even for a while and interview people that are new. And then you can start to see where the gap might be between some of the realities and maybe some of the myths. The other way is, what are things that people always say, but you've never seen any data to prove it?
That is a great one, Julian. That's what I was going to say. I mean, I think, we probably have all heard in our organizations, and it's not just associations that do this, right? Oh, they love this, right? Or there's a small or vocal component of an organization because everybody loves this, everybody does that. And that's an opportunity to maybe either validate that or have a different conversation if suddenly you find out, well, only 1% of the people actually engage with that product. So maybe we don't love it, or maybe we don't promote it, or maybe we don't, I think finding those things that are said in meetings or said in strategy conversations can get after those assumptions, right? Because sometimes they're said, but not backed up with anything besides somebody's feeling, which might be right? A subject matter expert might really know it. But it's nice to have the data to actually talk about rather than assumptions. And it creates a common playing field for everyone, right? So the person who's new in the room might not know how that meeting's gone for the past 20 years, but the data lets them participate, right? It lets them be knowledgeable too. So there's probably that benefit as well.
Yeah, the more that you can democratize data as an organization, the more you can really start to have that culture of data guided or data informed decisions. Going back to the poll question earlier, I think really everyone valued being a data guided organization or wanted to be a data guided organization. But there are steps as an organization that we need to take. Maybe one of the first steps is putting together that cross-functional team. Maybe it is you in this audience going ahead and putting together that first, myth. So I love that question. Or pulling together a data visualization to show membership, and maybe having that in a meeting and just having people ask questions about it. As you start to mature, what you'll start to see is you'll start the meetings and conversations around data. And so when I walk into like ASM's office and they're having an executive meeting, they're likely have a dashboard up on the screen. And they're looking at, okay, are we aligned with our goals? Are we aligned with our strategy that we've set out? Are we achieving that? And if not, why? Let's dive into why, and let's come out of this meeting with some actions. But that takes some work.
I think, Julie, with regards to myth busting, I mean, you said something there that I think is important, right? You don't have to walk into the meeting and say you were wrong about why people come to the meeting. It's, those long held views are sometimes close to people's hearts, right? And that becomes the data becomes a confrontation point versus a discussion point, right? And so sometimes it's about walking into the room and say, let's look at our attendance from the past 10 years, right? Or let's look at our membership from the past 10 years. And that engages people then in a discussion about what they're seeing as well, right? And applying their expertise and their knowledge and their experience versus disputing what they thought they knew. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Those are the best, even analysts or analytical thinkers that I can think of, are people that can just ask that next best question. And that's what it's really about. So you can take a course on how to merge data together. You can take a course on how to use, a visualization tool. But having that mindset of asking that next best question is something that anybody can have and should be very valued, if you're going for a data guided culture at your association. Any other questions? All right. Well, here we are. Of course, contact us if there's anything else that comes up, or if you're curious in more detail about Tom's analytical journey, or want to know a little bit more about data and analytics from Association Analytics, please reach out to us. And with that, I think I'll turn it back over to Sarah.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you so much, Julie and Thomas, for this wonderful session. Next on today's agenda is a 15-minute break, followed by 3 concurrent sessions beginning at 1:45. Make sure to grab your Starbucks coffee during the break, compliments of Visit Seattle, and we will see you all back here at 1:45. Thank you so much.
See you. Have a good afternoon.